Where did you get my wife's necklace? The question cracked through the ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet near the marble staircase stopped playing for half a second. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above hundreds of guests dressed in black tuxedos and silk gowns, but all eyes had shifted toward the woman standing beside the catering entrance. Maya Brooks froze with one hand still gripping the handle of her janitor cart. Rainwater clung to the hem of her faded navy uniform from the storm outside, and the silver pendant dangling from her fingers caught the warm golden light like something dragged back from the dead. Richard Hale stared at it, as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. The billionaire CEO stood motionless at the center of the memorial gala built to honor his late wife, Eleanor Hale, the woman America believed had died 2 years earlier in a tragic highway accident outside Boston. Giant black and white photographs of Eleanor lined the ballroom walls beside white roses and glowing candles. Her smile was everywhere. Soft, elegant, untouchable. But the necklace in Maya's trembling hand did not belong in this room. Richard knew every inch of it. The tiny diamond near the clasp, the engraved initials on the back. Yh. He had given it to Eleanor on their 15th anniversary during a winter trip to Vermont. The necklace had disappeared the same night she did. Answer me, Richard said again, quieter this time, though somehow more dangerous. Around him, executives from Hale International exchanged uneasy glances. Someone lowered a champagne glass. Someone else whispered, "Who even let her in here?" Maya swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry despite the smell of rain drifting through the open service hallway behind her. She had cleaned this building for 11 months. Mostly overnight shifts when the skyscraper became silent except for humming elevators and the distant sound of traffic 30 stories below. Most people never looked at her long enough to remember her face. To them, she was just the black cleaner who emptied trash cans and polished conference tables after midnight meetings ended. Invisible, safe to ignore. But tonight, Richard Hale was looking directly at her, and for the first time since she started working there, Maya wished he wasn't. "Your wife gave it to me," she said softly. The room went completely still. One of the board members let out a short, nervous laugh. "That's impossible." Another executive stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. "Mr. Hale, she's confused. Security can handle this." But Richard didn't move. His gray eyes stayed locked on Maya's face. The muscles in his jaw tightened, so hard it looked painful. "When?" he asked. Maya's fingers curled around the pendant. Suddenly, she could smell gasoline again. Cold rain. Concrete soaked black beneath flickering garage lights. Her heartbeat stumbled. "Not here. Not now." 2 years ago, she whispered. A sharp murmur spread through the ballroom like wind through dry leaves. Cameras from local reporters near the stage immediately turned toward them. Richard took one slow step forward. "You expect me to believe my dead wife handed you that necklace?" Maya looked down for a second before meeting his eyes again. There was fear there, but something else too. Exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying a secret too heavy for too long. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I expect you to believe she was afraid." The silence inside the ballroom stretched so long that the faint sound of rain tapping against the 30-foot glass windows became impossible to ignore. Maya Brooks could feel every pair of eyes pressing against her skin. Wealthy investors, politicians, reporters, men in $1,000 suits staring at her like she had tracked mud across sacred ground. Her janitor badge hung crooked against her uniform, still damp from hauling cleaning supplies through the freight elevator minutes earlier. She suddenly became aware of the bleach smell on her sleeves, the cheap rubber soles of her shoes squeaking softly against polished marble, the silver cleaning cart still sitting beside the dessert table like proof she did not belong in this world. Richard Hale's gaze never left her face. He looked different up close than he did in magazines. Older, tired in a way expensive suits could not hide. The grief carved into him had hardened over time instead of softening. Maya had noticed that during overnight shifts when she cleaned the executive floor. Sometimes around 2 in the morning, his office lights were still on above the city skyline, while everyone else had gone home. She would see him standing alone near the windows, motionless for so long, he looked almost unreal against the glow of Manhattan at night. But tonight there was something else in his eyes. Fear. "Miss," one of the executives snapped sharply, stepping between Maya and the CEO. His silver cufflinks flashed beneath the chandelier light. This event is private. Whatever game you are playing ends now. Maya lowered her eyes for a moment. She was used to voices like that. Cold. Dismissive. The kind that reduced people before learning their names. It had followed her most of her life. In restaurants. On buses. In office buildings where employees walked past her carrying coffee without ever acknowledging the woman cleaning around them. She learned years ago that invisible people heard everything. I am not playing a game, she said quietly. The executive scoffed. Then explained how a cleaning lady got access to Eleanor Hale's personal necklace. Before Maya could answer, another voice cut through the tension. Let her speak. Richard Hale's tone was low, but the command inside it landed instantly. Nobody argued. Maya looked up slowly. Richard stepped closer now, close enough to see the faint shadows beneath his eyes and the tremor in his right hand. He stared at the pendant resting in her palm, as though it carried the weight of 2 lost years. Where did she give it to you? He asked. Maya's chest tightened. The memory came back fast. Cold rain pouring through concrete ramps underground. Red taillights glowing through steam. Eleanor Hale sitting against a cement pillar in a white coat stained dark from dirty water and panic, her breathing uneven as she shoved the necklace into Maya's shaking hands. If they see you with me, they will come after you too. Maya blinked hard, forcing herself back into the ballroom before the memory swallowed her whole. In the parking garage beneath your old Cambridge office, she said softly. A wave of confusion rippled across the room. Richard's expression shifted instantly. That garage was closed after the accident. I know, Maya whispered. Because I was there the night your wife disappeared. Across the ballroom, someone dropped a champagne flute. The sharp crack echoed through the silence like breaking ice. Richard Hale did not even flinch. His voice became barely audible. You saw Eleanor alive? Maya hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the necklace until the chain pressed into her skin. Then she reached slowly into the pocket of her cleaning jacket and pulled out a worn flash drive wrapped carefully in tissue paper. She told me one day you would finally be ready to know the truth. The tiny flash drive looked almost meaningless resting in Maya Brooks's hand, but the moment Richard Hale saw it, the color drained from his face. Around them, the ballroom air seemed to tighten. The low hum of whispered conversations disappeared beneath the soft crackle of candlelight and the distant thunder rolling across Manhattan outside. Maya could hear her own breathing now, uneven and shallow, while reporters near the stage slowly lifted their cameras higher. One of the board members stepped forward immediately. Sir, do not touch that, he warned. We have no idea where it came from. Maya recognized him instantly. Daniel Mercer, Chief Operations Officer. Perfect gray suit. Perfect smile. The kind of man who nodded politely at everyone during daytime meetings, but never once looked directly at the cleaning staff after sunset. She had spent months quietly wiping fingerprints from the glass walls outside his office while hearing fragments of conversations people assumed she could not understand. Numbers. Lawsuits. Panic hidden beneath corporate language. Daniel's eyes locked onto the flash drive with a sharpness that did not match his calm voice. Richard noticed it too. Slowly, the billionaire reached out and took the drive from Maya's trembling hand. The metal surface looked scratched and worn beneath the ballroom lights. Where did you keep this? He asked quietly. Maya hesitated. The answer carried 2 years of fear inside it. Hidden, she said. Somewhere nobody would think to look. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. Richard, this is insane. We are standing in front of investors, media partners, and state officials because a janitor walked in with a story that makes no sense. Several people nodded nervously. Maya lowered her eyes again. Janitor. Cleaner. Maintenance girl. She had heard every version of it. Funny how people use job titles like walls. As if scrubbing floors erased a person's intelligence. As if grief only belonged to rich people in tailored suits. Richard turned the flash drive slowly between his fingers. Why wait 2 years? Maya's chest tightened. The answer sat heavy behind her ribs like wet concrete. Because nobody would have believed her. Because the night Eleanor disappeared, Maya had gone to the police station trembling in soaked clothes with the necklace clutched in her pocket, and the officer behind the desk barely looked up from his coffee before asking if she had been drinking. Because poor black women carrying impossible stories were easier to dismiss than investigate. I tried telling someone once, Maya whispered. It did not go well. The ballroom remained silent. Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not pity. Something deeper. Shame, maybe. Maya looked past him toward the giant portrait of Eleanor hanging above the stage. Her soft smile glowed beneath warm spotlights while white roses surrounded the frame. Eleanor looked peaceful there, untouched by fear, untouched by secrets. But Maya still remembered the real woman from that night. Rain dripping from blonde hair, hands shaking uncontrollably, eyes darting towards security cameras in the underground garage like someone terrified of being seen. She knew something was wrong, Maya said quietly. She kept saying she made a mistake trusting people inside the company. Daniel's face hardened instantly. That is enough. His voice cut through the room like cold steel. Mr. Hale, this woman is manipulating your grief. Maya finally looked directly at him. For the first time that night, she saw something crack beneath his polished calm. Not anger. Fear. Tiny. Hidden. But there. Richard noticed. It too. The billionaire slowly lifted his eyes from the flash drive and stared at Daniel in complete silence. Outside, lightning flashed behind the glass windows, briefly flooding the ballroom with pale white light. Then Richard Hale spoke without taking his eyes off his executive. If this is a lie, he said quietly, why do you suddenly look nervous? Daniel Mercer recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. Maya saw it in the way his fingers tightened around the stem of his wine glass before he forced a thin smile back onto his face. Men like Daniel built entire careers on appearing calm, while everything underneath them shook. Nobody here is nervous, he said smoothly. We are concerned because this woman appeared out of nowhere during a memorial event and started making accusations tied to a tragedy that nearly destroyed this company. Maya noticed he never said Eleanor's name. Richard Hale noticed too. The billionaire remained silent, standing beneath the golden chandelier light with the flash drive resting in his palm like a loaded secret. Rain rolled down the towering windows behind him in long silver streaks, blurring the Manhattan skyline into something cold and distant. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Richard looked toward the stage technician near the audio booth. Bring me a laptop. A sharp wave of whispers rushed through the ballroom. Daniel stepped forward immediately. Richard, think carefully about this. I am, Richard replied without raising his voice. That somehow made the room even quieter. Maya stood frozen beside her cleaning cart, while staff members exchanged uncertain looks around her. A few guests stared openly now, no longer seeing just the cleaner in a damp uniform. They were trying to understand how a woman who spent nights mopping floors had suddenly become the center of the most important room in Manhattan. Maya wished her hands would stop shaking. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times during sleepless nights in her tiny apartment in Queens. In some versions, Richard Hale believed her instantly. In others, security dragged her out before she could speak. But none of those imagined versions captured the heaviness inside her chest right now, because once the truth started moving, there would be no stopping it. A young assistant hurried across the ballroom, carrying a silver laptop with both hands. Richard took it without looking away from Maya. If I open this, he said quietly, there had better be a reason you waited this long. Maya swallowed hard. There is. Richard inserted the flash drive. The tiny click echoed louder than it should have in the silence. The screen flickered once. A folder appeared. No labels. No titles. Just one video file with a date stamp from 2 years earlier. Maya's stomach tightened instantly. She recognized the timestamp. October 17th, 11:42 p.m. The rain outside suddenly intensified, tapping hard against the windows like impatient fingers. Richard moved the cursor slowly toward the file. Then he stopped. Before I press play, he said, tell me exactly what happened that night. Maya felt every eye in the ballroom settle onto her again. She closed her eyes for half a second, and the memory returned immediately. Cold underground air. Concrete slick with rainwater. The sharp smell of gasoline. Eleanor Hale stumbling out of the parking garage elevator wearing a cream-colored coat, soaked at the sleeves. Maya had been emptying trash bins near the service corridor when she heard heels striking concrete too fast. Eleanor looked terrified. Not confused. Not injured. Terrified. Please. Eleanor had whispered that night, grabbing Maya's wrist with trembling fingers. If anyone asks, you never saw me. Maya opened her eyes again. Richard stood perfectly still waiting for her answer. Your wife came into the underground garage alone, Maya said softly. She looked like she had been crying. Daniel exhaled sharply beside them. This is absurd. But Maya continued before he could interrupt again. She kept checking the cameras, like she thought somebody inside the building was watching her. Richard's expression darkened instantly. Watching her for what? Maya looked down briefly before answering. For taking something they did not want you to see. The room fell silent again. Then the laptop screen suddenly illuminated by itself. A paused video frame appeared automatically. Grainy security footage. A parking garage. And standing near the elevator beneath flickering fluorescent lights was Eleanor Hale. The moment Eleanor Hale's face appeared on the laptop screen, the entire ballroom stopped breathing. Grainy security footage flickered beneath the soft chandelier light, casting pale shadows across the silent crowd. The timestamp glowed in the bottom corner. October 17th. 11:42 p.m. Eleanor stood alone beside the underground garage elevator wearing the same cream-colored coat reporters had described the night she supposedly died. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto the concrete floor while she kept glancing over her shoulder like she expected someone to appear behind her at any second. Richard Hale stared at the screen without blinking. Maya could hear his breathing now. Slow. Heavy. Like each inhale hurt. Oh my God. Somebody whispered near the back of the ballroom. Daniel Mercer immediately stepped closer to the laptop. This proves nothing, he said sharply. It is security footage from a parking garage. That does not mean she survived the accident. But his voice lacked the confidence it carried only minutes earlier. Richard did not answer him. His eyes stayed fixed on Eleanor's face frozen beneath fluorescent garage lights. Maya remembered that exact moment too clearly. She had been kneeling beside a gray maintenance bucket replacing trash liners when the elevator doors opened unexpectedly. Eleanor stumbled out clutching her purse tightly against her chest, her breathing uneven, mascara slightly smeared beneath frightened eyes. At first Maya almost did not recognize her. Wealthy people looked different in panic. Smaller somehow. More human. Play it, Richard said quietly. Maya's stomach tightened instantly. The assistant beside the laptop pressed the space bar. The footage began moving again. Eleanor stepped quickly across the garage, heels striking concrete in uneven rhythm. She looked over her shoulder twice before suddenly stopping near the service corridor camera. Then she turned directly toward the lens, toward whoever might one day watch. The ballroom remained so quiet Maya could hear the faint electrical hum coming from the speakers overhead. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and removed a small silver object. The necklace. She held it tightly in one hand while speaking to someone off camera. There was no audio, only silent footage, but the fear on her face needed no sound. Then another figure appeared briefly near the edge of the frame. A tall man wearing a dark overcoat. His face remained hidden by shadows and the angle of the camera. Eleanor immediately stiffened. Richard leaned forward slightly. Pause it. The image froze again. Daniel crossed his arms quickly. You cannot even identify who that is. Richard ignored him completely. Maya felt cold air brush against her skin as the ballroom doors opened briefly behind them, letting in another wave of rain-scented wind from outside. Nobody moved toward the exits. Nobody reached for another drink. Every person in that room knew something had shifted. Richard slowly turned toward Maya. You were there when this happened? Maya nodded once. Her throat tightened painfully. She came toward the maintenance hallway after that. Richard's voice became almost fragile. And she spoke to you? Maya looked down at her worn cleaning shoes before answering. The rubber edges were beginning to peel from years of overnight shifts. Funny how life-changing moments happened while wearing shoes nobody important would ever notice. She asked if there was another way out of the building, Maya whispered. She said she could not trust anyone upstairs anymore. Daniel scoffed softly. Convenient story. Maya lifted her eyes toward him. I did not know who she was at first. That answer seemed to hit the room differently, because it sounded true. Richard noticed it too. Maya continued quietly. She was shaking so badly she could barely hold the necklace. The laptop screen still glowed between them, illuminating Richard's face in pale blue light. Then Maya reached slowly into the pocket of her cleaning jacket again. This time she pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft along the edges from being hidden too long. Richard stared at it instantly. Maya's fingers trembled as she held it out toward him. She told me if anything happened, Maya whispered, to make sure you read this alone. Richard Hale stared at the folded paper in Maya Brooks's hand as though touching it might shatter whatever fragile control he still had left. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the rain streaking down the glass walls behind him, turning the entire skyline outside into blurred silver and gold. Nobody spoke. Even Daniel Mercer had fallen silent now, though Maya could still feel his eyes fixed sharply on the letter. Richard reached forward slowly and took the paper from her trembling fingers. It looked ordinary, just a single folded sheet, worn thin along the edges from being hidden too long. But the second Richard recognized Eleanor's handwriting across the front, something inside him visibly broke. His shoulders lowered slightly. The color drained from his face again. "No," he whispered under his breath, almost to himself. Maya looked away instinctively. She suddenly felt like she was intruding on grief that never really ended. Richard unfolded the letter carefully, his fingers shaking hard enough to rustle the paper in the silence. The chandelier light caught the silver of his wedding ring as he began reading. Maya could not see the words from where she stood, but she remembered them. She had memorized every line over the last 2 years without ever meaning to. Some nights in her queen's apartment, when sirens echoed through the streets below and sleep refused to come, she would unfold the letter just enough to reread the first sentence. Not because she wanted to, because carrying someone else's final fear changed a person. Richard's breathing slowed as his eyes moved across the page. The ballroom around him seemed to disappear entirely. Then Maya noticed it, a single tear slipping down the side of his face before he quickly wiped it away. Nobody in the room pretended not to see it. Richard Hale was famous for never showing emotion publicly. After Eleanor's death, reporters had described him as cold marble wrapped in a tailored suit. But now he looked less like a billionaire and more like a husband standing alone in the ruins of something he failed to protect. Finally, he lowered the letter slightly. His voice came out rough. "She wrote this the night she disappeared." Maya nodded once. "She asked me to wait until it was safe." Daniel stepped forward immediately. "Richard, this has gone far enough. We should contact legal before assuming any of this is authentic." Richard slowly lifted his eyes toward him. Maya noticed the difference instantly. Something had changed behind them. The numbness was gone now. In its place sat anger sharpened by grief. "Authentic," Richard repeated quietly. He raised the letter slightly. "This mentions details nobody outside my family knew." Daniel's jaw tightened. The room remained frozen beneath the low glow of candlelight and crystal reflections. Richard looked back down at the page again before speaking softly, almost like reading directly from Eleanor's voice. "If you are reading this, it means I ran out of time before I could explain everything myself." Maya closed her eyes briefly. Hearing the words aloud after 2 years made her chest ache in a completely different way. Richard continued reading. "Someone inside Hale International discovered what I found in the financial records. I do not know who I can trust anymore." A murmur spread quietly across the ballroom. Executives exchanged nervous glances now. Phones lowered. Smiles disappeared. The polished confidence in the room had begun to crack. Richard's hand tightened around the paper. "She wrote names," he whispered. Daniel immediately stepped closer. "Richard." But the billionaire ignored him completely. His eyes moved rapidly across the rest of the letter while the silence deepened around him. Maya watched his expression slowly collapse piece by piece. Shock, confusion, betrayal. Then suddenly Richard stopped reading entirely. His body went still. Too still. Maya felt cold dread rise inside her stomach. Richard lifted his eyes from the page and looked directly toward Daniel Mercer. Not with uncertainty anymore. Recognition. And for the first time that night, Daniel Mercer looked genuinely afraid. Daniel Mercer took a slow step backward, but the movement only made the tension inside the ballroom sharper. Maya Brooks could feel it spreading through the crowd now like invisible electricity. The wealthy donors near the stage were no longer sipping champagne. Reporters had lowered their microphones, watching silently instead. Even the musicians near the staircase sat frozen with their instruments resting untouched in their laps. Richard Hale stared at Daniel with a look Maya had never seen before. Not grief anymore. Clarity. The kind that arrives painfully after years of refusing to see what was standing directly in front of you. "You told me Eleanor was paranoid," Richard said quietly. Daniel forced a small laugh that sounded hollow in the enormous room. "Richard, this is emotional manipulation. You are upset. Anybody would be." But Richard did not blink. "You said she was exhausted. Confused. You convinced me she imagined corruption inside the company because she was grieving the loss of her father. Daniel loosened his tie slightly beneath the ballroom lights. Tiny beads of sweat had started forming near his temples now despite the cold air conditioning flowing through the room. Maya noticed it immediately. So did everyone else. Richard slowly lifted the letter again. His voice dropped lower as he continued reading directly from Eleanor's handwriting. If anything happens to me, do not trust Daniel Mercer. The silence afterward felt endless. Somebody near the back gasped softly. Daniel's face drained white. Richard. No, Richard's voice cracked across the ballroom harder this time. Do not say my name unless you are prepared to tell me the truth. Maya felt her heartbeat pounding painfully against her ribs. 2 years. She had carried this moment alone for 2 entire years. The memory returned again before she could stop it. Eleanor sitting against the cold concrete wall in the underground garage, breathing hard while rainwater rolled beneath parked cars. Maya kneeling beside her in confusion, holding paper towels from the maintenance closet while Eleanor shoved the necklace and flash drive into her hands. You seem kind, Eleanor had whispered through shaking breaths. Kind people still do the right thing when they are afraid. Maya had not felt brave that night. She felt terrified. Terrified. When 2 black SUVs entered the garage minutes later. Terrified when Eleanor disappeared through the service exit. Terrified every day afterward when news stations announced Eleanor Hale had died in a car accident hours outside the city. Richard suddenly turned toward the laptop again. Play the rest of the video. Daniel stepped forward instantly. Richard, listen to yourself. Play it. This time the command thundered through the ballroom. The assistant hit the space bar with trembling fingers. The grainy garage footage resumed. Eleanor moved quickly toward the maintenance hallway camera, looking over her shoulder repeatedly. Then suddenly she stopped and looked directly into the lens again. This time she mouthed something slowly. Richard leaned closer. Maya already knew the words before they appeared. The camera footage glitched briefly, then stabilized just enough for Eleanor's lips to become clear. Do not trust Daniel. The room erupted into stunned whispers. Daniel immediately shook his head. This proves nothing. The footage could be edited. But nobody sounded convinced anymore. Richard looked physically ill now, like the ground beneath his entire life had started collapsing piece by piece. Then Maya saw something else happen. Richard's eyes slowly moved toward her. Really looked at her. Not the cleaner uniform. Not the janitor badge hanging from her neck. Her. The exhausted woman who had spent 2 years carrying his wife's final truth, while people walked past her without learning her name. Richard's expression softened with something painfully close to regret. You protected this alone? He asked quietly. Maya swallowed hard. I tried giving it back sooner. Richard stared at her for a long moment while thunder rolled outside the skyscraper windows. Then his voice dropped almost to a whisper. And nobody listened to you because you cleaned floors. Richard Hale's words hung in the ballroom like something sacred and unbearable at the same time. Maya Brooks felt her throat tighten instantly because nobody had ever said it out loud before. Not like that. Not in front of people with power. Nobody listened to you because you cleaned floors. The silence that followed felt heavier than all the thunder outside combined. Rain rolled against the skyscraper windows in silver waves while hundreds of wealthy guests stood motionless beneath glowing chandeliers, suddenly forced to look directly at the woman they would normally walk past without noticing. Maya lowered her eyes instinctively. She hated being stared at. Always had. Growing up in Baltimore, her grandmother used to tell her that invisible people survived longer. Keep your head down. Work hard. Stay polite. Do not give people reasons to look at you twice. Maya had carried those words through every overnight shift, every crowded subway ride, every office hallway where executives discussed billion-dollar deals beside her mop bucket as though she were part of the furniture. But tonight invisibility was gone. Richard stepped away from the laptop slowly. The folded letter remained clenched tightly in one hand while Eleanor's necklace rested in the other. His expensive suit looked strangely unimportant now beneath the cold ballroom lights. Maya watched him carefully, unsure what would happen next. Daniel Mercer suddenly cleared his throat. Richard, think rationally. You are emotional right now. Richard turned toward him with an expression so exhausted it almost looked painful. My wife spent her final hours terrified, he said quietly. And the only person who protected her truth was someone this company never even bothered to see. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted him this time. Maya felt heat rising behind her eyes unexpectedly. She blinked quickly, trying to hold herself together. She had promised herself years ago that if this moment ever came, she would stay calm, strong. But hearing Eleanor finally believed after so long hurt in ways she had not prepared for. Richard looked back toward Maya again. The massive portrait of Eleanor glowed softly behind him, her smiling face watching over the ballroom while candles flickered beneath white roses. "You kept this hidden for 2 years," he said softly. Maya nodded once. "I was scared." Her voice nearly cracked on the last word. Richard closed his eyes briefly. "You should not have had to carry this alone." Maya felt tears gathering anyway now despite fighting them. Because no one had ever said that to her before either. Not after her mother died. Not after eviction notices. Not after overnight shifts that left her feet aching while strangers looked through her instead of at her. Richard suddenly took another slow step toward her. Gasps spread quietly through the ballroom as the billionaire CEO stopped directly in front of the woman holding a janitor cart beside the catering entrance. For one suspended moment, nobody seemed to understand what they were seeing. Then Richard Hale lowered himself onto one knee. The room collectively froze. Maya's breath caught painfully in her chest. Richard looked up at her with eyes full of grief, shame, and gratitude all tangled together. "I failed my wife," he whispered. "And this company failed you." Tears finally slipped down Maya's cheeks before she could stop them. Richard's voice trembled now. "While we buried Eleanor, you carried her final truth completely alone because people saw your uniform before they saw your humanity." Across the ballroom, several executives looked down at the floor. Reporters slowly lowered their cameras. Even Daniel Mercer seemed unable to speak anymore. Maya wiped her face quickly, embarrassed by the tears, but Richard remained kneeling beneath the chandelier light like a man stripped of everything except honesty. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on her when the rest of us did." The ballroom stayed silent long after Richard Hale's voice faded into the sound of rain against the windows. Nobody seemed willing to move first, as though even the smallest motion might break whatever fragile truth had finally surfaced in that room. Maya Brooks stood frozen beside her janitor cart with tears cooling against her cheeks, while the billionaire remained on one knee in front of her beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. For a brief moment, the entire world inside Hale Tower felt stripped down to something painfully simple. One woman who had carried the truth alone. One man realizing too late how many people he had stopped seeing. Richard slowly rose to his feet again, but something about him had changed. Permanently. The sharp authority that once filled every room around him seemed quieter now, softened by grief and humility. He looked toward the giant portrait of Eleanor hanging above the stage. The soft smile in the photograph no longer felt like part of a memorial. It felt like a witness. Richard walked slowly toward the stage, still holding Eleanor's letter in one hand and her necklace in the other. The crowd parted automatically to let him pass. Nobody spoke. Daniel Mercer stood motionless near the laptop, his face pale beneath the ballroom lights, while security officers quietly approached from the edges of the room after receiving silent instructions through their earpieces. Maya barely noticed them. Her chest felt strangely light now, almost unfamiliar after carrying fear for so long. Richard stopped beneath Eleanor's portrait and looked out across the ballroom, filled with executives, reporters, and investors. "For 2 years," he said quietly, "this company celebrated my wife's memory while ignoring the woman who protected her final words." Nobody looked comfortable anymore. Several executives lowered their eyes. Others stared silently at Maya like they were seeing her for the first time. Richard glanced toward the cleaning cart beside the catering entrance. A yellow pair of rubber gloves rested on top beside folded rags and glass cleaner bottles. Simple things. Invisible things. The kind wealthy people stopped noticing. "We built an empire obsessed with status," Richard continued softly. "Titles. Offices. Appearances. And because of that, the bravest person in this building spent 2 years believing her voice did not matter." Maya felt fresh tears threaten again, but this time she let them come. Slowly, Richard crossed the ballroom back toward her. He stopped only a few feet away. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "I cannot change what you carried alone. But I can make sure nobody in this company is ever unseen again. Maya looked at him quietly. For the first time since entering the ballroom, she no longer felt small. Not because people suddenly respected her. Because she finally understood Eleanor had been right that night in the garage. Kind people still did the right thing even when they were afraid. Outside, the storm had finally begun to fade. Rain slowed against the glass until only soft droplets remained sliding down the windows. Far below the skyscraper, Manhattan traffic glowed gold and red through wet streets. One by one, guests quietly began leaving the ballroom without speaking. No music returned. No speeches followed. The memorial gala had become something else entirely. Maya reached slowly for the handle of her cleaning cart again. Habit. Routine. The same motion she repeated every night after everyone important went home. But before she could turn away, Richard gently stopped her. He held out Eleanor's necklace carefully in his open palm. She trusted you with this, he said. Maya looked at the silver chain glimmering softly beneath the chandelier light. Then she closed Richard's fingers back around it. No, she whispered with a tired but peaceful smile. She trusted me to bring it home. Richard's eyes filled again, but this time he did not hide it. Maya turned quietly and walked toward the service hallway while dawn slowly began rising over the city beyond the glass. Behind her, Richard Hale stood alone beneath his wife's portrait, holding the necklace against his chest while the first sunlight touched the windows of Hale Tower.